Ted Peters. Kind of like Charmin, I'm coming up on the rear here for the day. Contingency and freedom in brains and selves. The overall topic of Saturn is randomness, but could it be randomness in the subatomic physical world? Could it be what it is that we need to account for your and my experience of freedom? I have a thesis I want to develop. Human free will exists, and what we mean by free will is self-determination. As Velimati showed, that we're in a period of time right now when there's a lot of sophisticated people who think that free will is a delusion. And they're going to show it's a delusion by explaining just how it is that the brain, the physical brain, takes over the responsibilities of what we thought was free will. Well, I want to start phenomenologically and ask what it is that you and I experience. What do we observe? What we observe is ourselves as a self, deliberating, making decisions, and taking actions. I think that's what free will is when it occurs, and we do it every day, and we can look around the room, we can see our friends doing it every day, and the job of the philosopher, the job of the natural scientist is to explain it. What I think is happening is that it's being explained away. And if you're going to explain something away, the burden of proof is a little bit greater than if you're just going to explain it. Formulating the issue is important. I formulate it slightly differently than Velimati did, even though I think we overlap and agree. Quite frequently, freedom, human freedom, that's what I'm concerned about, human freedom, is pitted against determinism. Therefore, if you can make a case for indeterminism somehow or other, you have supported human freedom. That's not the route I want to go. I want to say that a three-part determinism will suffice. What we get in the current discussion is a two-part determinism, whether it's in the genetics discussion of the 1990s or more recently the neuroscience discussion. The second is a duplicate of the first, same issues. And in both the neuroscience case and in the genetics case, we have a two-part determinism. Either it's our genes or it's our brain. It's got something to do with what we used to call nature. And then nurture, epigenetics, how your mommy and daddy raised you, the wider culture, etc. And what you and I experience as freedom can be reduced to the interplay between nature and nurture. And I would say, no, that's not the way it is. There's a third determinant, and it's the self. And the self that deliberates, makes decisions, and takes action is what is at stake. So when you get an argument, either by someone using genetics or using neuroscience, when you get an argument that free will is a delusion, pause for a minute. That's not what's being said. What's being said is there's no self. The self doesn't exist. And what you and I think of as a self is really nothing more than a configuration of nature and nurture. So what I want to say phenomenologically is what we mean by freedom is a self that makes choices, takes actions, and those actions actually affect the world. Just imagine what Berkeley might have looked like 500 years ago and what it does now. Well, it's people who made deliberations, made decisions, and took actions that affected the environment that we have. So that's my main task, and in part, I don't feel like I need to rely on the indeterminist argument to make my point. Now, what I think about determinism versus indeterminism, I just want to put in brackets, put it on the shelf. Even if you give me a deterministic world, I still think you can make a case, an adequate case, for the existence of human freedom, what we call free will. It's just that the determinant in this case is the human self. However, the larger framework within which we've been working is the relationship of whatever we experience at the human level to the global level, the physical, the cosmological, etc. And I have listened to Bob Russell frequently over the years, and he has an assertion that he makes. Indeterminism at the subatomic level is a necessary, though not sufficient, cause of free will at the human level. I'm persuaded by that. I think that's on target. And yes, it's the self, the existence of the self, which takes actions that constitutes human freedom, but there is an openness in being, so to speak, which is a prerequisite. Even though for this argument, I don't feel I need to defend Bob Russell's position or any other indeterministic position. Basically, I like it. So, at any rate, I was kind of proud of myself. I finished my paper, and I thought I'd made the defense of free will very strongly. And then Bob, who read an earlier version, says, "Well, Ted, you've defended free will, but you don't believe in free will, right?" Yeah, I forgot. I don't. So I had to go back and think theologically. What do I think theologically? Because I've just demonstrated that Pelagius was right. That what you and I experience on an everyday basis is that we make choices between alternatives. And St. Augustine, Martin Luther, and other theologians have had problems with that because there's one choice you and I cannot make, and that's a choice for God. And related to that, of course, is we can't actually choose for the benefit in love of another self. And so every choice that we make, every decision we make is always for the benefit of ourselves. And for Augustine and Luther, that's bondage. That's not freedom, that's bondage. So here we finally get, to the threshold of affirming free will, and now these theologians probably never enjoyed a good cocktail party, right? Oh my gosh, what we thought was freedom is actually bondage. And what they mean by it is that the exercise of our free will in the Pelagian sense is always an expression of the self, the needs of the self, the desires of the self, the promotion of the self, etc. How can we get from that to loving another for the sake of the other, or loving God for the sake of God? St. Augustine said, well, the Holy Spirit gives us the power to do this. Or Martin Luther's version was stated slightly differently, but it was the same thing. He was an Augustinian monk. The Holy Spirit places Christ within us in faith. And when we love another for the sake of another, that's actually God's grace at work from within. So one small lesson to be taken from this is that in the garden variety debate over whether we have free will or not, what the Christians mean by free will is not even on the agenda. There's nothing implicitly theological about the current public debate. A theologian is going to have to add it because there's a different definition of freedom at work. That's it. Bye-bye.
Do we have 5 minutes for some questions before we have a panel? So we have a question here.
Do you ever defend your position saying it's a philosophical triad, and philosophical triads are an inherent part of existence, like the Trinity, mind, body, and soul, and if you do, you can get equivalential calculus out of mathematics to support you, as that's part of existence, is the way mathematics looks at it.
You know, I've never thought of that.
Joshua?
Joshua.
So I'm thinking of the work of Justin Barrett, Kellerman, Pascal Boyer, cognitive science of religion, and the idea that humans are intuitive theists.
Intuitive theists.
Intuitive theists, due to our cognitive architecture, and which sounds a little bit like Bronner's idea of grace, you could say. So there's not a choice for God. And folks like Andrew Newberg and even Michael Persinger would agree with being hardwired for religion. But then Persinger's God element could get an effect from Susan Blackmore, who's an atheist, not Richard Dawkins.
What's the difference between Blackmore and Dawkins?
That's the question.
Oh.
So not everyone is an intuitive theist.
Yeah.
And the question of nature versus nurture, so I guess that's the question. With freedom, it seems to make a lot of sense in one sense, but in the other sense, why would some be intuitive theists and not others?
So Joshua was asking,
Theologically.
why might, theologically, why might some be intuitive theists and others are not? If we take a look at Karl Rahner and Paul Tillich, they're going to say that you and I as human beings naturally or intuitively ask the question of God. You don't give an answer right off the bat, but we ask the question of God. Why? Because there's something in the human mind that takes us beyond the limits. I don't know how old Xavier is right now, but you get these why questions, the sequel, why? Well, the human mind is asking why, and then finally you get to the God question, and that's just built into the human mind. And I think most Protestant Roman Catholic theologians are going to say, well, that's God's grace already there at the beginning. It's a first grace, so to speak, that inclines us towards God. Well, then, theologically, some people answer, well, there's a God there who loves me, and other people reject it. Well, then you're kind of getting into the area of sin. So, intuitive theism, if you put it at the level of the question of God, would make sense to me. But intuitive theism as an affirmation, that would be more restricted. Here's another thing. What about individuals and cultures? I mean, there seem to be some individuals who go through their whole life, they don't give a rip about God. In fact, it hardly even dawns on them. Yet, when you look at the history of cultures are asking the question of God all along, even if many individuals, in it don't care. So I would just say in general, the human mind is oriented towards the God question, but not much more specific than that.
So we have 3 questions and we'll close. Jerry, Sunghun? Did you have your hand, Sunghun? No. Then Jerry, Paul, and Valimati.
My question is somewhat of an extension of this last one.
Yeah.
And that is, I've heard different theological interpretations or explanations of a bound soul.
Of a what?
Of a bound will, sorry.
A bound will, okay.
What
Bound
do you
will.
see as the explanation theologically and or evolutionary/scientifically?
Well, theologically, and this is mainly in the Latin tradition, which includes Catholics and Protestants, it has to do with the doctrine of original sin. We just come into the world and we're self oriented. And one of the tasks then of engaging the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit loosens the grip of our self-orientation so that we can love God and love our neighbor. If you're an Eastern Orthodox Christian or Syriac Christian, you don't put it in exactly those categories, but we in the Latin West do that. It appears to me that the Darwinian tradition, especially when you get to the sociobiologists, only reinforce this. Because now, at least as a species, every species is out to survive, and the self in this case, not the way Richard Dawkins describes it. I think the self would be the species. Is we're going to get on to the next generation, etc. So I find those homogenous, basically, and these recent attempts among the sociobiologists to go back and find precedents for altruism. They don't even touch the theological issue, just because you can find examples here and there of altruism between two different species, both of which are cooperating, etc. It doesn't approach what the theological issue is at stake. But in general, I don't see anything in evolutionary biology that would be a problem for original sin. If anything, it reinforces it. Paul?
Yeah, I got you. You got nature, nurture, the self, still in the brain, and then all of a sudden you threw in this ghost, this Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
And now you're a pituitarian to get me there without having to go through the ghost.
Well, I can see Jesus in your heart from here.
Moving right along.
I've had the thought lately with regard to the mind and the brain relationship is that the brain is clearly local between my ears, but I don't think the mind is. That doesn't mean I'm going to put it in another space. I mean it's just plain not local in the same sense that the brain is. And my lovely wife Karen frequently will say, "Well, an idea just came into my brain," and I'll say, "Wait a minute, no, I think the idea is in your mind," etc. So if we're going to talk about the work of the Holy Spirit, let me just say I didn't think that it could be localized in the pituitary gland or anything else. So you're shaking your head, huh? Nonsense? What do you think?
I'm shaking my head. Maybe confused on a higher plane. Still confused. Okay.
Okay, Velimati.
Yeah, I wish to go briefly back to what Josh was reference to Justin Perez and others work. And I highly appreciate Justin is my colleague at Fuller. But Justin also knows that with the kind of idea of born believers or intuitive theists, it's very ambiguous result, even if it's valid. Many are saying no wonder there are born believers after so many millennia of religious indoctrination. And so like Darwin would say, yeah, perhaps they are, but hopefully they'll be healed soon. And then there are others who say, yeah, many of us are also born killers or thieves. It doesn't make it a good or a bad thing. So it's one example of a great empirical result which can be read in so many ways. And it's currently it's done both by theists and atheists, and some others don't know what they are.
Okay, let's thank Ted again. Five-minute stretch break, and we come back for the final.